My mother used to say that the best medicine grows from soil, not synthesized in a lab. She said it the way she said most things that mattered, quietly while cutting vegetables at the kitchen counter, or while standing at the stove on a winter afternoon when the light outside was already going. I did not appreciate those words then. I do now. So let me start here, at the answer. There are 5 foods. Inexpensive, ordinary, entirely unremarkable in a grocery cart, that researchers have found can produce real, measurable reductions in blood pressure in seniors. Not supplements, not new prescriptions, just food, understood properly, used consistently. If blood pressure is something you or someone you love is managing, you need to hear what follows. I created this because I needed it to exist. I searched for something that explained the evidence clearly, without jargon, without burying the meaningful parts under disclaimers. What I found was mostly noise. So this is the conversation I wished I could have had, built from real research, from genuine attention to a topic that has never been abstract to me, and from the kind of honesty that comes from loving someone whose health you think about more than they know. I am Dr. Reginald Hawthorne. By the time we are finished, you will know exactly which 5 foods matter most, why the biology behind each one actually works, and how to begin using this knowledge before your next trip to the grocery store. Let us get into it. High blood pressure, hypertension, is quietly one of the most misunderstood conditions affecting seniors today. When I say misunderstood, I do not mean by the person dealing with it, I mean by the culture surrounding it. The message most of us absorbed over decades is that high blood pressure is something you manage with a daily pill, and then you move on. Take the medication in the morning, check it off the list, and consider the problem handled. I understand why that message spread. The medications work, many of them work remarkably well, and in genuinely high-risk situations, they are essential and non-negotiable. I am not here to argue otherwise. What I am here to say is what almost nobody explains clearly, not to the person standing at the kitchen counter trying to figure out what to make for dinner. That food and blood pressure have a relationship so deep, so mechanically precise, so biologically layered, that what you put on your plate each day is either actively supporting what your body is trying to do or quietly working against it. Scientists recently figured out that consistent dietary changes can shift the systolic reading, that top number on your blood pressure monitor, by anywhere from several to more than 10 points, depending on the pattern of what you eat and how steadily you eat it. For a senior managing borderline hypertension, that is not a small movement. That could be the difference between a reading your doctor calls stable and one that triggers a conversation about increasing your dose. Your cardiovascular system is not a closed machine that medication alone operates. It is more like a living garden, responsive, dynamic, sensitive to what it is given season after season. Prune the right places. Feed the soil what it actually needs. And the system, over time, finds its way back toward balance. High blood pressure in seniors specifically involves several biological processes that food can directly influence. Arterial stiffness, which increases with age. Chronic low-grade inflammation inside the vascular walls. Fluid retention driven by sodium load. And the mineral balance, particularly potassium, magnesium, and calcium, that determines how tightly or loosely the blood vessels contract throughout the day. Each of the 5 foods we are going to discuss addresses at least one of these mechanisms. Several of them address more than one simultaneously. Anyway, that is the landscape. Let us talk about what is on the list. The first food I want to talk about is one I buy in bulk now. I did not always. For most of my adult life, spinach lived at the back of my refrigerator in various stages of being forgotten. Purchased with good intentions, left until it quietly deserved an apology, and then thrown away. What changed was understanding not just that leafy greens are good for you, but what specifically happens inside the body when you eat them with any regularity. Leafy greens, spinach, kale, Swiss chard, collard greens, arugula, are among the richest dietary sources of potassium you will find in any grocery store. And potassium is the counterweight to sodium in your body's pressure equation. Every time your kidneys decide how much fluid to retain and how much resistance to hold in the arterial walls, they are running a constant calculation between sodium load and potassium availability. Most seniors eat a diet heavier on sodium than potassium, and the math runs in the wrong direction. The arterial walls tighten, the pressure rises. When you consistently increase your dietary potassium through leafy greens eaten most days of the week, you are literally tipping that calculation back toward equilibrium. Researchers comparing groups who increased their leafy green intake against those who maintained their usual diet found meaningful blood pressure reductions in the leafy green group, and those reductions were consistent across multiple weeks of observation. There is also a nitrate story here that deserves to be told plainly. Spinach and arugula are particularly rich in dietary nitrates, and your body converts those nitrates into nitric oxide, a compound that actively relaxes and widens the arterial walls. More width, less pressure. Lower resistance against which the heart must push. A consistent supply of dietary nitrate is, in essence, a gentle and sustained biological signal to your arteries to remain open and pliable. The form does not need to be complicated or expensive. A large handful wilted into whatever protein you are cooking for dinner. A generous portion folded into eggs in the morning. A pile of arugula dressed with olive oil and lemon. Consistency is the mechanism. Perfection is not required. If you rotate through kale one week and Swiss chard the next, the potassium and nitrate benefit remains. What matters is that these greens become a pattern in your week, not an occasional gesture. The second food connects directly to that same nitrate pathway, but with a concentration and an immediacy that genuinely surprised me the first time I encountered the research. I will explain that in a moment. Before I do, let me tell you about a particular Sunday morning. My father used to make oatmeal every week without exception. Not the instant kind. The old-fashioned kind that took 20 minutes and made the kitchen smell like something warm was arriving from somewhere far away. He ate it simply. A little milk, barely any sweetness. The same way every time. And I grew up thinking of it as habit, as ritual, as nothing more than a preference of his generation. I understand now that he was doing something genuinely important for his heart and his vascular system, without necessarily framing it that way. Old-fashioned oats and steel-cut oats contain a specific, soluble fibre called beta-glucan. And beta-glucan is one of those compounds that the more researchers study it, the more seriously they take it. It does not only smooth out blood sugar absorption and slow digestion, though it does both of those things meaningfully. It also binds to certain compounds in the digestive tract in ways that reduce arterial resistance and preserve the flexibility of blood vessel walls over time. Studies comparing groups who consumed oats consistently against those who did not have found replicable reductions in blood pressure across the oat-eating populations. The effect from any single bowl is modest. The effect from a daily bowl, repeated over 6 to 8 weeks, is the kind that shows up on a monitor. Do not make the mistake of buying instant flavoured oat packets for this purpose. Check the labels carefully. Many of them contain as much added sugar as a small packaged dessert and sodium levels that begin to undo the very benefit you are reaching for. Plain oats, real oats. These are what the research actually reflects. The fourth food on this list is one I will confess I feel something personal about, and I think that is worth naming. Blueberries, specifically blueberries, though dark cherries and blackberries carry related benefits, contain a family of compounds called flavonoids, and within that family, a subgroup called anthocyanins that give the berries their deep blue-purple colour. These are not merely pigment, they are biologically active molecules that interact with nitric oxide pathways in the arterial walls in ways that reduce vascular stiffness and improve the elasticity of blood vessels as they age. Researchers comparing adults who consumed blueberries regularly against a control group found meaningful and sustained reductions in systolic blood pressure over several weeks of consistent intake. The reason I feel something personal about blueberries is that my mother started eating a cup of them every morning a few years ago, after a health scare made her take her numbers seriously for the first time. Her readings improved, not because of blueberries alone. She made several changes at once, but they improved. She is still here, and I am deeply grateful for that. A cup per day is enough. Fresh or frozen, the anthocyanins survive the freezing process, which matters because frozen blueberries are affordable across every season and every budget. That is the kind of detail that should be stated plainly, and is often not. Now I want to spend a full, unhurried moment on the fifth food, because this one is the one most people walk past without realizing what they are walking past. It does not come in health-branded packaging. It does not cost what a supplement costs. It has been sitting in kitchens for so long that it barely registers anymore as something clinically significant. And that invisibility is, I think, one of the most interesting things about it. Garlic. Crushed, chopped, raw or cooked garlic contains a compound called allicin, which forms when a clove is mechanically disrupted, when you crush it with the flat of a knife or mince it with a blade. What scientists recently figured out is that allicin interacts with the same enzymatic pathway that a specific class of blood pressure medications is designed to target. That class is called ACE inhibitors, angiotensin-converting enzyme inhibitors. And they work by relaxing the blood vessels and reducing the resistance against which the heart pumps. Garlic produces a similar, gentler inhibitory effect on that same enzyme through a completely natural biological mechanism. Multiple clinical trials comparing garlic against placebo in people with hypertension have found statistically meaningful reductions in both the systolic and diastolic readings. The effect is well documented enough to appear in mainstream cardiovascular nutrition literature, not just in the corners of alternative health publishing. There is something you need to know to actually get this benefit. Though, and most people do not know it, if you chop garlic and immediately add it to a hot pan, the high heat destroys the enzyme responsible for forming allicin before allicin has a chance to be created. The allicin never forms, you get the flavour. You do not get the biology. The method that preserves the most benefit. Actually, let me say that differently, because this is worth saying precisely. The correct approach is to crush or chop the garlic and then leave it on the cutting board for 10 minutes before it touches heat. In that 10-minute window, allicin forms naturally and becomes heat-stable enough to survive normal cooking temperatures. This costs nothing. It requires only the habit of chopping garlic a little earlier in the cooking process. 10 minutes of patience is the entire difference between garlic as flavour and garlic as medicine. If you tolerate raw garlic, a small amount minced into a salad dressing or mixed into a yogurt-based sauce delivers the highest allicin concentration of all. One important note: if you are currently prescribed an ACE inhibitor medication, tell your prescribing physician that you are increasing your garlic intake in a meaningful, consistent way. The combination may work powerfully, and your blood pressure numbers should be monitored accordingly. This is not a caution against doing it. It is a reason to keep your doctor informed. Here is where I want to step back from the individual foods and talk about how this actually works in a real week, a senior's real week, where grocery shopping sometimes involves fatigue, where cooking for one can feel like more effort than the result justifies, and where beautiful intentions sometimes sit in a refrigerator until Thursday, when they get quietly apologised to and discarded. This is not a judgment. I have watched this happen. I have felt it happen, honestly, more times than I would like to admit. The research on dietary blood pressure management consistently points to something that gets underemphasized in most health content. Consistency across a week matters enormously more than perfection on any single day. You do not need all 5 foods every day. You need them across your week as a pattern, repeated with enough regularity that your vascular system receives a cumulative signal rather than an isolated gesture. Think of tending a garden. You do not stand over every plant every hour. You create a rhythm of care across days and weeks, and the garden responds to the rhythm, not to any single act of watering. Your arterial system works the same way. Leafy greens 4 or 5 days a week, oats most mornings, blueberries as a daily snack or added to whatever you are having for breakfast, beets roasted or juiced a few times a week, garlic prepared correctly and worked into your evening cooking as a habit. That is not a complex protocol. That is a pattern of care. What should you be cautious about alongside these efforts? Sodium is the single most powerful counterforce to everything these foods are trying to accomplish in your body. If you build a spinach and beet salad and dress it with a store-bought dressing carrying 400 milligrams of sodium per serving, you are partially neutralizing your own work. Read the sodium content on packaged items. The targets recommended by major health organizations for seniors managing hypertension are typically under 1,500 milligrams daily, a threshold that is shockingly easy to exceed without noticing, because the sodium is not where most people expect it. Canned soups, deli meats, jarred sauces, seasoning blends, even certain breads. These carry sodium levels that accumulate quietly across the day and work against the potassium and nitrates and flavonoids you are deliberately building into your meals. Let me ask you something. After hearing everything we have discussed so far, What is the one food on this list that you feel most ready to start adding to your week, starting now? Tell me in the comments below. I read them, genuinely, and I would love to know what lands for you. I want to be honest with you about expectations because this is where a great deal of health information loses people. It overpromises and underdelivers, and the person who tried in good faith ends up feeling foolish for having believed it. So here is what is real. If you make consistent, meaningful dietary changes using the foods we have discussed, alongside whatever medical treatment your physician has recommended, not instead of it, you can reasonably expect to see movement in your blood pressure readings within 4 to 8 weeks. If you are starting from a diet high in sodium and low in potassium and phytonutrients, that movement may come sooner. If you are managing more advanced arterial stiffness or long-standing hypertension, the dietary changes will amplify and support what your medication is doing, rather than replace it as a standalone intervention. This is not a failure. This is not the food not working. This is the biology being straightforward with you about what diet can and cannot accomplish alone. And that distinction is worth understanding clearly. Monitor your readings at the same time each day, same arm, seated, after 5 minutes of quiet. Keep a simple written log over 6 to 8 weeks. What you are looking for is not any single reading, which can swing based on stress or sleep or the difficult phone call you had an hour before you sat down. What you are looking for is a trend, a gentle, consistent downward movement across many readings over many weeks. That trend is the evidence that the garden is responding. For seniors who want to extend these benefits further, moderate movement, a 20-minute walk most days, appears to meaningfully amplify the cardiovascular response to dietary nitrates. The body uses nitric oxide more efficiently when circulation is active. The walking does not need to be vigorous, it needs to be regular. Consistency, again, is the mechanism. Everything in this conversation keeps returning to that word: consistency. The garden does not thrive from one perfect watering. It thrives from daily attention, given imperfectly over a long time. I want to come back to where I started, just briefly. My mother at the kitchen counter, the winter light, the vegetables she was cutting with the steady confidence of someone who knew, without knowing the research, that what we feed ourselves is woven into who we become, physically, over time. She did not always have the science. She had the practice. I think about what I wish I had given her. Not a warning, not a list of things to fear, but exactly this: a clear and honest conversation about 5 specific foods that could have quietly and persistently worked in her favour, compounded over years. Leafy greens, beets, oats, blueberries, garlic. The biology behind each of them. The small details of preparation that make them actually functional, rather than merely present on a plate. I cannot go back and have that conversation with her at the time it would have mattered most. But I can give it to you, right now, while there is still time for it to matter. This is not a dramatic intervention. It is not a protocol that demands a new version of yourself. It is a set of quiet, affordable, scientifically supported choices that you can begin layering into your meals starting with the very next one you eat. Every day that includes spinach or kale is a day where your potassium balance tilts in the right direction. Every morning with oats is a morning where beta-glucan is doing its slow and steady work inside your digestive system. Every week that includes beets or blueberries is a week where your arterial walls are receiving a different, more supportive signal than they received before. It does not feel dramatic. Gardens rarely do until you look back after a full season of consistent care and realise how much has quietly changed. Here is what I'm asking you to do in the next 10 minutes. Not tomorrow, not after you finish everything else on your list. Right now. Take out a piece of paper or open a note on your phone and write down one meal you plan to eat this week where you will include at least 2 of the 5 foods we discussed today. One meal, just one. Oatmeal with blueberries tomorrow morning. A spinach salad with roasted beets and a garlic dressing on Thursday evening. Write it down and put it somewhere you will see it before that meal happens. That is not a diet overhaul. That is a seed placed in prepared soil. And seeds, given consistent attention, grow into something that sustains you. Sometimes longer than you expected, and sometimes in ways that still surprise you. Your body is not finished responding to care. Start tonight.